Hi there. Welcome to Women in Business, where I share the real-world stories of fabulous women who've made their mark in the business world. In this podcast, we look at the educational and professional journeys and their choices, as well as the aha moments that have led each of my guests to their success. When I started my business, I didn't know anything about the opportunities that were out there. But over time, and especially during the pandemic, I've seen women pivot their careers, create new careers, and shape their own futures. My hope for our listeners, whether you're a young girl dreaming big or a woman ready for a change, that you can find some inspiration in these interviews and see all the different possibilities that are out there for you and become inspired to create your own journey and go your own path. So let's get started with this week's guest. So thank you for coming along, and tell everybody, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Jo. I run a small business. My background is that I was a copywriter and set up a content marketing agency about 7 years ago. About 3 months ago, I started a podcast. I've written some little books on marketing. And I don't know what else there is to say about me, really, other than I'm tired. It's just been half term.
So
I'm
you have
fucking
kids.
tired.
How old are your kids?
My kids are 2 and 4.
Oh, dear God. Yes.
Yeah,
The
so
young
yeah. So I am definitely juggling, and I feel at the moment like I'm learning to juggle. I'm not actually juggling. I'm just somebody that's picking the balls up and then just repeatedly dropping them.
Where did you start then? So what I like to do is I like to go back to little Jo. Little Jo at school. She's in high school. What were her options? What did she find herself doing hobby-wise, schoolwork-wise, that was creative? Did you find that you were creative back then?
Yeah, I think so, but I think I was just a bit of a nerd really at school, and I was really dedicated to my studies. I really enjoyed like learning.
Mhm.
And I did do, art and graphic design and things like that. But my main passion at the time was history. And I was very, very keen on it and ended up studying that at university. So, what was I like at school? I don't know if I was any different to how I am now, in all honesty. I've always been I don't know if I'm an extrovert or an introvert. I'm somewhere sort of in between the two. And I think there were some things about school that I managed well, and there were other things that were hard for me. I think as my education progressed, I found it easier. I actually found secondary school harder than A levels, and I found A levels much harder than doing a degree. As I got around people who were more kind of like me, a bit more nerdy, I think I sort of felt a bit more at peace. But at secondary school, I went to quite a rough school. It's actually been knocked down and
Where are you
rebuilt since
from?
I left. I'm from Rutland,
Where's that?
England's smallest county. And the school I went to, it was a lot of porter cabins, a lot of supply teachers.
Mm.
And it wasn't like an outstanding school. It had a real mixture of teachers and a real mixture of students. And I went on to become a teacher after I left university. And one of the reasons I went and did that was because my own experience of school was mixed. I had some
Mm.
really good teachers that really sort of inspired me. And then I had some other teachers that were sort of chronically absent, and we had a lot of supply teachers. I think we had 9 supply teachers for our English GCSE year. So we had, constant
That's bad.
turnover of like of staff. And I think it's because there just was a shortage of staff or whatever in the area. And I don't think the school's like that now because they've rebuilt it. And I think it's now got like, lots of money's been poured into it. So I think the school itself now is really good. But both me and my brother at school struggled, I think, because we were like dorky, nerdy individuals. And I wasn't, a popular kid by any stretch of the imagination. And so I think I just sort of kept myself to myself, and I flew under the radar until I did my GCSEs, and my GCSE results came out, and a lot of the teachers were like, "What?" They hadn't really noticed me up until that point. I'd been quite quiet at the back, and I did well in my GCSEs, and I think the teachers hadn't really noticed, if that makes sense, and went into my
It
A
does.
levels.
Yeah, my background is in, so I was a HLTA before my back injury. So I've seen both sides. I've had my kids go through the whole education system, and I've worked in the education system. And of course, me myself has been in the education system. And I've seen that. I always say that there was 3 streams, and I always felt sorry for the average kids. My son and I didn't get noticed. We did well enough not to be noticed for being bad. And we didn't do well enough to be gifted and talented to be noticed for being winners all the time. But we got good grades. We turned up to school. We never caused trouble. And they're the kind of things that should really be rewarded, but they don't tend to be rewarded. And it's no fault of the teachers or anything like that. It's just government and time and money and finances. And I've always thought that, I feel sorry for the kids like you and I that were the average ones that maybe could have had a better school experience if there was a better system to cover everybody. So then you went into A levels, and you did you become noticed then?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know to what extent I was ever really bothered about being noticed by my teachers. And when I was doing my A levels, I was absent quite a lot. I used to skive quite a lot.
Yeah, me too.
And I think one of my A levels, I had 30% attendance. I was off a lot. And so I think I was just quite difficult to deal with, like progressively more difficult. Starting in year 10 upwards, I think I got less and less invested in sort of the teacher being the one doing the teaching. And I used to nick books from the libraries and teach myself at home and just sort of do what I wanted. I think I was quite rebellious. But yeah, I didn't feel very inspired by my college either. My college was so tiny that they didn't even teach any A-level languages, and I wanted to do French and German. They didn't really have it on offer for someone who also wanted to do history, and I didn't want to drop history, so I had to drop something I really cared about. And yeah, the classes were really small. That also got knocked down, so my A-level college is now an Aldi.
Right.
And it was called the Rutland College, and it wasn't really they'd never dealt with anyone that wanted to go to Oxford before. They didn't know anything about the application process. And I got into clashes with teachers quite a lot because I felt like I wasn't being challenged and I wasn't really being stretched. And so my behavior got worse and my attendance got worse. And
yeah, I think it's a normal progression through A levels to certain people if they're not being engaged. So did you go to Oxford?
No, I got an interview, but I didn't get in.
Well,
got the grades, but my interview wasn't. I was all over the shop. I remember not knowing what to talk about. I hadn't really been prepared for it, so I just didn't know what they were going to ask me about. So I just didn't know what to say.
But
I
it's
was so
hard.
nervous.
Our college had our head teacher used to, everybody that had the grades to go to Cambridge or Oxford used to go to a special class with him where he trained them for the interview
Sounds great.
process and application and everything, because it's so hard to get into. It's like elite, which is something else I don't really agree with. But hey ho, let's move on. So you did history at university. Now, I love history. I taught history at primary school when I was doing my HLTA. And I found from the people that I've interviewed, a lot of creatives all say that their subject that they really loved was history and followed it on. So when you went into teaching, were you teaching high school?
Yeah, I started off, I did something called Teach First, which is like a sort of a graduate scheme for teachers going into really rough schools.
Right, hang on. Before we go on, I might have made us jump a bit there. So let's go back. So when you left college, you went to university. So straight from university, did you do this straight into teaching? All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I did. And I taught history and English to begin with. And then I moved into a private school where I taught history and politics A level. And then I became a head of history. And then I was promoted to head of faculty just before I quit.
Wow. And why? Well, I'm not. You see, when I find things really interesting, my brain is jumping to, I want to ask a question. I want to answer that, but I can't jump that far ahead. So I'm going to come back to that. But firstly, did you find, did you like the progression going up from teaching to then being management, more or less?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. God, yeah. Yeah, no, it's It was fabulous. It was really nice working with other people. It's nice being a sort of team lead. I loved it.
And you
Um,
prefer, did you ever consider going into primary, or was it you were always going to do secondary?
no, no, I never did. No, I wanted to be a secondary or A level teacher, and I did enjoy A level the most. I quite liked the sort of the challenge of it. But yeah, I loved being a history teacher, and I really like being in charge of the syllabus and setting my own curriculum, especially if you're working in schools where it's, you know, ethnically diverse and you've got
Mm.
a history curriculum that can reflect that diversity. That was something I was very passionate about. So I'd always kind of start again, do a year, and then sweep the slate clean and rewrite the entire curriculum to
Which is
reflect
not,
the kids in front of me.
to people and read that are listening, that's not normally, I mean, I can't speak for all schools, but quite often they create the planning like on a, places that I've worked in, one of them had a 2-year rota, another one had it like in a 3-year rota or something at primary school anyway. So you have all the lessons planned, and then the next year you've got different lessons, but then eventually you come back round. And what you're saying is you would to scrap it and do all of your planning because of the kids that are in your class.
That's right, yeah. And that was really from when I started. Because I was really disappointed with when first went into education. We'd been taught like the syllabus and the diversity of things on offer, and then you'd go into these schools, they'd all be doing World War I, Hitler, and yet you had this student group in front of you that might be really diverse, like from all over the world, and yet you've got these opportunities to teach them things that will be relevant, and you're not doing it, and that used to piss me off, especially because a lot of them would be girls, and we'd be teaching history that was mainly about men. And
Yeah.
so the first thing I do would be to scrap, you know, as much of that as possible and teach them about the suffragettes and the women's movements, things like that. And then as I got more confident further down my career, I started doing more American history, the civil rights movement, Native Americans, things like that. And I did do like the Israel-Palestine conflict as well in one school, which was really fascinating. And so as the years wore on, I became more political, much more political about teaching a sort of really, I suppose, a left-wing syllabus, like a syllabus that encouraged things like, you know, democracy, decolonization, diversity, women's rights, because it was at the time you could do that. The history
Mm.
curriculum changed under the Tories and became a lot less varied, the national
Mm.
curriculum. And with the way in which exams happened as well. So exams used to be, you know, you do coursework and you'd have opportunities to resit. But the Tory government changed A levels to make them all linear. So you'd be doing 3-hour exams at the end of a 2-year course. And for kids from different backgrounds, it's like that's hamstringing them before they've had a chance to even demonstrate how clever they are, because they might not have space to revise at home. If you've given them coursework or if you've given them AS levels that count towards their overall grade, they got chances to read it. And I just got very pissed off. And I was like, I just can't keep doing this. I didn't really want to work within the frameworks of the Tory kind of.
I'd like to see anybody else to study, like any adult, you know, even in our jobs now, you go off and you learn every day for 2 years and then come back and sit an exam for 3 hours. You'd probably be really happy if the subject comes up that you've learned in the last 6 months. But if the subject that you started learning 2 years ago, my brain space wouldn't have it in there. I mean, I did
Yeah,
A level physics, chemistry, and maths. I ended up doing. I didn't do history. Loved history at GCSE. And my history teacher was really good in the fact that it was in over the 2 years, you had 6 modules, like six subjects we were going to learn about. But one of them, he said, because there are so many and we can't fit them all in, you're going to choose what you want to learn and you're going to teach yourself, and I'm going to oversee it. So I chose the women's rights movement. And so
yeah,
I learned all about that. And that, so that I became really passionate about that subject. So I made sure that when I went to primary, I didn't have control over the curriculum, but I could choose my lessons and do my planning. I made sure that I mentioned bits about the women's movement when we were learning about the war, post-war, and things like that. That made sure that the little snippets of where I could get things in. But even doing my science A levels, I can remember sitting that in a blooming exam and thinking, thank God that these questions are covering what we've just learned, because it makes my life so much easier. So, well, Tories, well, I don't mind being political. Hopefully they'll blooming well get voted out, and hopefully we can make a fix. But even then, even before then, I think the education system as a whole, it just got harder and harder. I know so many people that are creatives that I've met, networking, everything, that we're all have been in the education system, and we've all left, which leads me to the question was, what was the final thing that made you decide to quit your job?
I had some stuff published. I had some articles published in The Guardian, and there were no edits. And I was like, I feel like I can do this. Well, the only thing I knew about at the time, so they were about education. So I'd written about my kind of views on education, and I'd pitched them to an editor on Twitter, and she published a couple of things I wrote under a pseudonym. And I was also doing a lot of stand-up comedy in the evening. So I was kind of moonlighting at the time as like doing some stand-up comedy.
Just drop that in.
And
I'm sorry. People aren't going to see this because we don't do the video bit. I just do the audio. So the people that can't see us, obviously, is my eyes just went wide because Jo just dropped in there. You do stand-up comedy.
I used to. I don't anymore.
Just the fact that you did. That's such a sort of like a difference from teacher by day, stand-up comedian by night. Though saying that, Romesh used to be a teacher and has become a comedian. So maybe it's not that strange. Sorry, continue.
No.
So
yeah, I was doing sort of gigs in the evening and then writing as well on the side as a side hustle. And I was teaching the kind of kids who were going off to do like interesting internships. I remember I had one kid who was doing an internship at the BBC over the summer, and she was talking to me about it. And I was just feeling really jealous. And I was just increasingly feeling like I've got one life and I want to have a go at the things that my students are doing that are making me feel jealous. And so I quit really with no idea of what I was going to do, no onward job. I just sort of threw the whole lot in the bin all at once. Everything I'd done, all my career up until that point, I just chucked it fucking out the window and decided to start again from scratch, age 29. I just was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want to do it. And I cannot explain to you how that happened, other than the fact of in my 20s, all my friends are sort of settling down, getting married and all that stuff. And that just wasn't for me. I just was like a bit, of a free spirit, and I was doing my own thing. I was teaching, I was enjoying that. I was increasingly getting sucked into the world of comedy, and I was writing as well in my spare time. I wasn't really interested in sort of like getting married. I didn't give a shit about having a family. I was just like, I just want to keep going and see what happens. I was with this guy at the time, and he wasn't really encouraging me to be creative or anything like that. He proposed in McDonald's. And
he needs to work on his game.
Yeah, I was with this guy and I was just like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. So it all happened around the same time, which is that I ended a relationship that I'd been in for 7 years. We had a mortgage together. That all fell apart. I left my teaching career as well around that time and just sort of started again from scratch. I went back and moved in with my family. I was only there for 2 weeks in the end, but I just put all my furniture in storage, sold the flat, moved back in with my mum and dad, and just sort of sat in the garden with my dad scratching my chin going, what am I going to do now? And I think he enjoyed that, actually. He was really supportive of that. It was because I thought I've thrown all my toys out the pram here. My family are going to be really disappointed in me and I didn't want to let them down. But that wasn't the case at all. I was really lucky that they were both kind of like sort of almost happy for me, like, oh, fucking brilliant. Like, what's she going to do now? And yeah, that was the beginning of a period in my life where I felt like a great degree of control over my own future and destiny to the extent I'd never had before. Because when I left university, I felt real pressure to get a job and start a career. I thought, like, I need to get a job, I need to get money, I need to pay my rent and stuff. I just didn't know that I had any had any freedom, really.
Options.
Do you know what I mean? It sounds like a weird thing to say, but I just sort of carried on. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s where I was like, you know what, why am I doing this? I've got another 30 years of work, maybe more, maybe less, but I don't have to do this forever. If I'm going to stop, I'm going to have to stop now. So I just stopped everything. And I think it freaked some people out, you know, because I dyed my hair bright pink. I got some tattoos, and everyone was just like, what the fuck? You know, I think they thought I was having some kind of
A nervous
mental
breakdown.
episode. And maybe I was, you know, but I think it was a nervous breakdown that I was entitled to. And anyone who's taught for nearly 8 years under the Tories during an economic crisis would have felt at some point like they wanted to chuck the toys out the pram and dye their hair pink, because it was so full on and it was so sort of thankless. It was rewarding in many senses. Being a teacher's great, but it was very difficult for me to feel like I could never quite get on top of everything, and I could never do a good enough job, and I could never get the marking done, I could never get the planning done, I could never be at all the meetings, I could never quite give every kid what they needed. And I think I burned out, I think is the expression. I just like ran out of puff, I ran out of steam. And then when I went into marketing, you know, it was a great degree of naivety and a real lack of understanding of the world of business. I was like a toddler, you know, in the marketing world. And I just stumbled my way through the past 6, 7, 8 years of finding my own feet. And I still feel like a kind of complete beginner. People talk about beginner's mindset, and I definitely have that, not because I'm some kind of like Zen believer in like Japanese philosophy, but because I'm genuinely a fucking beginner. Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I feel like any humility or beginner's mindset has come from the fact that I just feel so bang out of my depth the entire time. But that's something I enjoy, because when you're a teacher, you know, you're sort of expected to be the authority on everything. You're expected to know all the answers. And as a freelancer, more often than not, you're part of a team, or, you know, there's somebody that can help you. There might be somebody who's even telling you what to do, giving you a framework. And that for me is like, sweet.
Yeah. I mean, freelancers, I mean, it sounds like I'm talking about like a herd of lions or whatever, but in my journey, it was when I sort of started meeting and networking with freelancers that I realized that freelancers work on their own, more or less, as in their own business. Yet there is a massive network of people that are so supportive in the freelancing world. Whereas if you were working for a company, I find you're a little bit more stepped back, a bit colder, whereas freelancers are there with open arms going, yeah, I can help you with that. This is what you do, pointing you in the right directions. And I'm like you in the fact I had to change my career because of an injury. But I think society and school or whatever, you know, I should never have gone to university. I always say I should have done a YTS and got a skill, but that's not what you did. You went to A levels, and if you did A levels, you went to university. So I went to university, didn't like it. And then, you know, you followed that kind of path down that route. And some people, some creatives definitely were not given the opportunities to explore what was out there. And one thing I learned when I started the podcast and when I started my business, I did not know how many jobs that were out there. Didn't even know what a copywriter was.
Yeah,
You know,
that's right.
So, and you just got to think everything that you touch, everything that you look at, someone somewhere has had a job to create it in some way. So there are so many jobs, and you're not taught that at school. You're taught that you're going to go down this route. So obviously you did it a lot younger than I did. So well done. You discovered it a little bit earlier. So when you did the writing for The Guardian, I mean, that must have been feeling brilliant that they'd put it in and it hadn't edited. Had you already been, so you say you had some books, have you written the books before The Guardian, or was The Guardian articles what pushed you forward?
It didn't really do anything, to be honest. It was, I had worked in a state school and a private school for about the same length of time. I'd noticed the differences between the two, and I wrote an article about the pastoral differences and about how private schools have this whole system built in that state schools don't, to protect and look after the children going there. And the argument in my article was that I don't know if the academic side of private schools is that much better, but the pastoral care of the kids is noticeably more holistic and more complete. And like looking at the two stacked against each other, it was very stark, and it was troubling because, you know, in state schools you've got 2,000 kids who are all going into this system, being flushed in and flushed out, and in private schools there's this whole separate pastoral hierarchy that protects the kids, supports them, talks to the families, gets them involved in sports and other activities, and it's that system that caters to getting them into the next bit of education or whatever they want to do with their lives. And working in that environment, I was like, wow, God, there's so much difference between the two, and it wasn't in an area I was expecting it to be. I'm going massively on a tangent, but I had just written something to get it out of my head, and it got published, and I couldn't tell anyone because it was under a pseudonym, and I was working in this school. I didn't say anything bad about the school at all, but I was just, as a teacher, you do feel that you're kind of under embargo and you shouldn't really be talking about it. We weren't allowed on social media at the time, you know, the teachers were all banned from having accounts and things like that. So it was a real kind of, I felt like I was going off and doing comedy in the evening and then writing under a pseudonym and then coming back and being a teacher. And yeah, I think I just sort of felt like I was torn between the two, and I didn't want to have to, you know, be in a career anymore where I sort of felt like I was always looking over my shoulder and wondering if there was anything more. And so, yeah, I think it was that maybe having the article published gave me the confidence that I could do it. I just felt like if I could get this published, I could get other stuff published.
So what was your next step? What did you do after that then, when you'd quit your job and you had decided that you were going to go down this writing route?
Oh, I didn't know anything about writing. I mean, I just didn't know anything about anything. I cold called marketing agencies and just said, can I get like some experience? I got a job at a social media agency. I got like a 3-month internship. The other person on the internship, we were both working this 3-month tryout for one position, and we were being paid way below minimum wage. And I realize now that that was like massively unethical, but at the time I thought that's fine. And it was really sink or swim, because it was like you're managing like these big high street name social media accounts with like hundreds of thousands of followers. Off you go. And I was just there going, right, okay, fuck, what do I do? What's the hashtag? I don't know. Like, I didn't know. And I just managed to just about get through that 3-month internship, but that was such an eye-opener for me. I knew nothing about social media. I knew fuck all about digital marketing. I had no qualifications at all. I was just flying by the seat of my pants. And I came out of that one like bruised, scathed, but fundamentally I could finally see how shit I was. And I think that was really important, was to get a really clear, visible, like, oh, you're really bad at this. And that was very motivating, because I was like, okay, but I want to get better at this. This is the thing I want to do. I just want to get better at it. So I got another job. I worked at in-house client side for a year, managing their social media accounts. And I got better because I only had a few little accounts to manage and I had loads of time to do it, unlike working in an agency. But I was moonlighting as well. So I was like writing blogs for B24/7. I had a column in the Bristol Post at the time as well, writing about comedy and interviewing comedians. And I was running some gigs as well. I was running a comedy night, getting more into comedy. And the nature of comedy is, you know, you're writing and you're standing up and performing, and you're going in the day doing social media, coming back in the evening, writing some other blogs. So it was all helping me get better at it, mainly by failing. So I was failing to do well at comedy. I was failing in my social media job. I was missing all my KPIs. I was, you know, like generally having my ass handed to me morning, noon and night. And I was also single, and I was living in a different city. I'd moved to Bristol, and I was just this fucking chaotic mess. I had, by that point, like a buzz cut, a purple buzz cut. And I think I was just like having some kind of mid-20s, late 20s crisis. But I was enjoying it. I don't know if like the people around me were enjoying it, because they were just like, oh, she's got even more mental.
It's got nothing to do with them, as long as you're enjoying it.
Do we do? She's got purple hair. But I was having a great time. And then I went and worked for a PR agency, and that was really interesting. I worked on these like big crowdfunding campaigns and got some stuff again in the national news. I loved that. And, you know, the lady who ran the agency,
were you able to say that it was yours?
No, it was all written for someone else. And the lady just kept giving me more work to do. She kept giving me more work and harder work to do, like weird clients that had like really complicated products they were trying to sell, impossible deadlines. And I was like, yes. And I loved it. And I was also working at this other agency as well at the time in the evening, because they'd got in contact with me and they were like, do you want to do some blogs? And I was like, yeah, fuck it, I'll write some blogs. And so I was writing blogs in the evening for this other agency. And then they came and they were like, yeah, we'll give you a promotion. You can come and run a content team for us if you want. So I went over there and did that. By this point, I was starting to use comedians from the circuit to write blogs. And I was like a content manager at this point. I was setting like content strategy and doing a bit more of that. And I had done the Mark Ritson MBA as well. So I did the marketing strategy MBA. And that helped me to get a bit more of an understanding of like what the fuck marketing is. Because at that point, I still didn't really know. And I just started sort of dipping my toe in the water of like sales as well. So I'd got, I'd won a couple of clients for this agency. And that gave me the confidence, like, oh, I can sign a contract, I can get a client over the line, I can upsell a client, I can create a strategy, like I can manage a team. And I realized that how much more I'd grown, at all these different places I'd worked, it all got progressively harder. But that feeling of like not being very good at something is something that I really respond well to, and I enjoy it when I feel like I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, because it's a problem I can solve and I want to get better. And I was working for some inspiring people, like, I think especially the lady that ran this PR agency and the guy who ran this B2B agency. They were both, really clever and savvy and like, market aware. They were good with people. I really looked up to them and learned a lot from them. And I was having a great time, and just enjoying myself. So yeah, I set up my own business, a bit like how I left teaching. It just all kind of just happened all at once. And I just threw my toys out the pram. And that happens a lot, I think, actually. I just like, I get to the point where I'm like, fuck it. And I just do something crazy. And so that's what I did. That was 6.5 years ago. I just did that and just set up a business without really knowing what I was doing again. Never set up a business before, didn't know about accounting, didn't know about bookkeeping, didn't know about contracts, didn't know about anything. And I just sort of found out the hard way. I'm still learning the hard way, let's face it. I'm still...
You like to study though, don't you? So obviously, as you get to the point that you've reached the pinnacle of where you think you can be in that place, you then have to think, right, now I need to go and throw myself into something that I'm not good at, that I can learn about, so I can do that again. Because like you say, you like to feel like you don't know. So it's like that whole learning part that you like to do, I suppose. I'm sort of the same. And my job differences is that I've always reached a point that I can't get any further. And then I go, yeah, okay, I'm bored of this now. What else can I do? Because I like that drive. I didn't have a drive when I was a teenager, but I like having that drive of, okay, what don't I know about? How can I learn about it? And I've always said to my clients when they say, oh, do you work with such and such, one of the 100 platforms that is possibly out there? And I will go, oh, honestly, no, but I'm willing to learn. And then I go off and I learn all about it. So the next time someone asks me that, I can say, yes, I do know how it works.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's just a group of people that we are, that go into teaching, that we do like to do all that learning. So you started this podcast. What made you decide so you've got your business, you're doing your writing, and you've now started this podcast. What made you decide to do the podcast?
I don't know. I mean, what made you decide to do yours? I bet it was similar. I've got 2 daughters. After my first daughter was born, I went back to work. And after my second daughter was born, it was a bit of a more slow return to work for me. It didn't come so quickly. And when I did go back, I wanted to do some networking with other mums, because I felt quite sort of, motherhood of my second had rocked me a little. And I wanted to be around other mums. And so I did a couple of different networking organizations for mums, but I found all these mums were quite sort of down on themselves, and they were like, oh, running amazing businesses, doing amazing things, but sort of feeling a bit like, oh, it's a Wednesday, I'm a bit pissed off about this, I'm a bit annoyed about that. And I think I'd been going a bit longer than some of them as a freelancer. I'd been going maybe 4 or 5 years longer. And so the people I knew who had started 4 or 5 years previously were all having a great time, and I was having a great time. So I was like, okay, what if I interview all the people I can think of who are smashing it and just get them to talk about it in a very open way? It might be inspiring to somebody who's a more junior freelancer or somebody who's running their own business, who's maybe feeling that pain of like whatever it is that they themselves are struggling with. It's all about sharing this sort of, and what's interesting for me is that there's 50 different, 50,000 different types of freelancer. There's 50 different ways of running a business. Every person you speak to is so completely unique.
I like the fact that yours you've got definite questions as your titles, whereas mine's just a free for all of, like I said earlier, I've had to find a place to, I'm not elite like Steve Bartlett or whatever. I don't have a studio. I'm sat at my neighbour's dining room table due to builders being in my house. So you have to go with the flow with my podcasts. So what things do you have going on in the future then? So you've got your podcast that's going to be going on. Have you got anything else coming up?
Yes, I'm actually just launching another business. So I've 2 things are going on. I've got some investment into lean content. So that is I've moved into an office and I'm getting a new website for that built. And I'm going to try and grow that one. And I'm launching another business as well and another podcast in the next couple of months.
So you'll have 2 businesses, 2 podcasts.
Yes. Yeah.
2
but they're
young
all
children.
Yeah. It's all under the same it's going to be under the same, business umbrella. And it'll be within the same, it's all within the same-ish context. I'm just trying to figure out now how it's all going to fit together. But I'm really enjoying Niche Upon a Star, which is the freelancer podcast. But I'm also going to start a podcast about startups and agencies. So rather than just solopreneurs, it's going to look at people who've built big teams and who've grown from like one person to lots of people. Many. And it's about just like Niche Upon a Star is about the journey, but for Niche Upon a Star, it's about one person going from like finding their feet to then having a business that they're sort of comfortable, they're in a state of flow. This other podcast is called Scale and Polish, and that's going to be about how do you grow a business.
That'll be good.
Let's say you're really successful at something, but you want more. What do you do? What's the steps? Like, how do you do that? Because I think a lot of people, me included, get stuck, in the place where you're kind of in the middle and you're not quite a business. You're not quite a freelancer. You've got a team underneath you and you're kind of doing the mid-level stuff. How do you take a step up? That's what I'm interested in. And I'm going to start a podcast agency as well with the same name. And I'm going to start producing podcasts for people. I want to move into audio content over written content. I think written content will always have a place, but I really enjoy editing audio now, and I kind of want to be able to do that for businesses. And also I think if you do a podcast for someone else, it's a great jumping off point for loads of other kind of content. It's great fuel for your social media. You can turn it into a webinar, you can turn it into an ebook, you can turn it into whatever you want.
Yeah, you could do a course on how to do audio. Well, thank you for talking to me today. Good luck with the other podcasts. So if people are listening, Niche Upon a Star, and keep an eye out for Scale and Polish that should come along in a couple of months. So thanks a lot.
Bye. Thanks for having me.